same if our eyes were just either slightly different from what they are. We talk, we see things are not normal.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. Alison,
Yes,
other than itchy, how are you doing?
I'm fine. You know, Tim talks a lot about like people going berry picking and they see Bigfoot. You know what supernatural thing happened to me? Tim took me berry picking and I'm covered in poison ivy. Like,
Yeah, I do kind of feel a little bit bad about that. But the berries were good.
they were good, but they're not worth this. I'm sorry, they're not worth this.
The irony is I was wearing shorts,
And you basically were just like, I'm just gonna walk into the poison and
shoes without socks, and I have two little itchy spots on me, and you're covered.
and I had long socks on and like kind of longish
Yeah, I mean, you're
pants because I didn't want to get poison. Then there's not a lot of bathrooms in the woods.
there are not a lot of bathrooms in the woods.
So I just had to go outside, and I think that's where some of this happened. I think I tucked my oily pants like kind of into myself as I was trying to.
Kind of squatted on
Just
your
yeah.
on your pants as you.
Yeah, that's why I have all this poison ivy behind my knees.
Yeah. Did you did you warn before you peed and then apologize afterwards?
No, so I probably deserve this.
The Hex Hollow fairies got you.
Yep.
They got you with the poison ivy.
It was for the day being as hot as it was, and it was in the 90s. Down there, it was a full 20 degrees cooler. I bet. 15.
5.
Oh, you had a nice time, but
No, it was a nice time. I got you in the creek.
Yep.
Didn't think that was going to happen.
No, it's been a while.
Wading in the creek a little bit. Yeah, berries are good this year. I know you said it wasn't worth it, but
No, they were really good that first night before I had poison.
wineberries and blackberries are delicious, and both are ripe in southern Pennsylvania. I'm not sure what else is right now, but those are, and they are fantastic. The blackberries are especially good this year. Wineberries are always good, but the blackberries are really nice and sweet this year. Love them.
John brought us tomatoes. I'm psyched about that. So
Yeah, it's well, I won't say it's the only positive, but for me, it's one of the positive things about this time of year in which I get seasonal depression. It's kind of the opposite of you. We kind of trade off our seasonal depression. I am not a fan of this heat at all. I just want it to end. I want winter to be here.
I do not want winter to be here.
I'd trade summer for winter in a blink of an eye.
Really? When you look out there and it's like gloomy as all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's better than this burning heat when I step outside. I feel like I'm going to...
At least there's some sun. There's something to give you like
I'm not getting out in it anyway. It's too hot.
that is the great irony of it, is that all I want to do is be outside this time of year and it's just too hot.
Yeah, it's been way too hot these past few weeks. You know, we need a Strange Familiars swimming hole location.
Well, we just found out today the one that we used to use, it has E. coli in it. So.
Yeah, they did a water test on Muddy Creek. One of the most beautiful hikes you'll see in York County. And I always thought the water was fine down there. I've swum in Muddy Creek multiple times.
Yeah.
And then they came out with a warning today with avoid contact with the water in Muddy Creek. So
When you jump in and cannonball, take a big old
yeah,
gulp of that water.
I mean, it doesn't say. It says avoid contact. It didn't even say
like drinking it,
Yeah,
like don't get it on your skin because if you have an open cut, you might get E. coli. Kind of thing.
I don't know. It just said avoid contact. I'm going to go with that and hope that the east branch of the Cadorus where we were waiting before is fine. So what are we doing on tonight's show, Alison? This is all you. I'm going in almost blind to the show. I kind of know what we're doing, but not really. So
we are on even footing. Because when it comes to me, there's a certain amount of procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
Today when I was supposed to...
All of it?
Yeah. Today when I was supposed to be finishing this up, I decided that I wanted to start another episode of a topic that I thought in the moment sounded cooler than what I'd done. So, just in the moment, only because it was new.
Well, I know part of the show is going to be about a hermit.
Yeah.
And usually the hermits are kind of the heroes of our hermit stories.
Not this one.
Not the case with this one, yeah.
Just as a little heads up, both of these stories deal with some horrific things happening to women, which is not something that I generally like to delve into. And the one lady we talk about, while she's deceased, I do think she has living relatives. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try to be respectful of that. And it's a peculiar thing to have happen when relatives contact you about stories that they did, which we have had happen. And I want to be respectful, but at the same time, this is public information. It's an interesting story, but also as a heads up, if you're not into bad things that happen to women, this is a creature double feature of that.
Okay, yeah. So content warning.
Content warning, yeah.
Before we get into that, though, I'd like to thank our patrons. Thank you, patrons. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for your help in making Strange Familiars. We could not and would not do it without you. If you like what we do here at Strange Familiars and you'd like to get extra content and help us make the show, you can become a patron at Patreon. It's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get commercial-free versions of the weekly episodes, plus extra content. We do at least one full episode every month. Last month we did a full episode and kind of a mini episode. It was almost a full episode, a second episode. So we give you extra content whenever we can. To check out all the options, go to patreon.com/strangefamiliars. Once again, we are most likely raising the Patreon buy-in. The lowest tier is now $4. We're probably going to raise that to $5. But if you get in now at $4, and you can pay monthly or yearly, so you can pay for a whole year at once. If you get in now, you can be grandfathered in. So as long as you stay at that tier, and as long as Patreon lets us do it, so far they have, $4 a month forever. Even if we raise the rate 5 more times, you can just stay in at that tier, and that's all you'll pay. Like I said, as long as Patreon lets us do that, we'll keep doing that. So now would be a great time to get in there. It helps us out. You get extra content. Once again, it's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can also subscribe there. It's called Patron of the Strange there. And Apple Podcast subscribers get the commercial-free episodes weekly as well as the bonus audio content each month. And I want to thank all of our patrons, no matter where they're signed up. Thank you so much. It's a huge help, and you help make Strange Familiars happen. So I'm working on this Hermit's book, Alison. Mm-hmm. And, I'm based off of my collection of hermit photos. And like I said, I like the stories where the hermit is kind of the hero of the story, right? These are the forgotten people. They've chosen to go their own way. Some of them are kind of like artists. Some of them are just people who cut their own path through the world, right? There's another hermit who we haven't talked about who has a mugshot in my book, for something unsavory he did. He's definitely not the hero of that story. So there are some others out there. There are some
people that are hermits because they can't be around other people or shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And I came across this photo of a hermit. It's a press photo, and he is definitely not the hero type. He's not the hero of the story. But the photo was so striking, and I will use it probably as the image for this episode, so everybody will see it. I'll put it in the show notes as well. It's a young woman literally pointing out this guy.
Yeah, she has that j'accuse kind of look on her face.
She is pointing right at him. It's a press photo, so this would have been used in the newspapers from 1926, I believe. Is that the right time? Yeah.
May of 26.
So on the back of the photo, this would be the caption they put in the newspaper. Girl identifies hermit as alleged attacker. New York. Photo shows Rose Tarabash, 13, pointing at Frank Lipshitz, religious Russian hermit, and accusing him of attacking her near that very spot. That's him, the girl shouted when confronted with the hermit dressed in a long overcoat and cap. Armed guards were present to prevent attempts at lynching the man. It's a very striking photo, despite the topic at hand.
Yeah, and at first I thought, like, oh, they're just dragging this guy out because he lives out in the middle of nowhere. He's an easy target.
That's the other side. A lot of these hermits get accused of stuff just because they're unusual people. Mm-hmm. They get accused of stuff that they weren't doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that happens too, certainly.
And as far as I can tell, well, they listed her name in the paper sometimes as Tara Bash. I think indeed it was actually Tara Dash. One of them is of a more Italian name, and then this is from an area of New Jersey that's in a kind of an isolated Jewish community. I think.
Okay.
This is also a lesson in, like, we always think, like, oh, nothing's ever changed. We haven't made any progress. But when you see how we treat, well, I don't know if we've treated people better who are victims of crimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, here I am doing a podcast about it, so I guess perhaps not. But the way she's written about in the newspaper and the details of what happened to her, like, and this is just a very young 12 or 13-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. It's beyond offensive how they treated this girl. But in the picture, I mean, she's had a long time that she had to recover from her injuries, and to know so definitively that this was the person, she was absolutely right.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm going to read the first article that talks about what happened to her. And I think we've talked before about, kind of hint around what's going on here, but when they use the term fiend, I think that implies that there's some sort of sexual assault going on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's often they'd use sort of code words like that everyone understood what they were talking about, but without getting too specific.
I will tell you that while this girl at a very young age endured a very horrific crime, she did go on to have a very decent life. She got married, had children that were very successful. I read about in the paper. So, like,
oh, good. That's good to know out front.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not to take away from anything she went through.
Absolutely.
But hopefully it meant she had enough support in her family that people helped her through. And then it wasn't one of those things where people saw this as a black mark on her character to some degree. And she,
right. Okay, so when and what paper is this article from?
Well, here's the thing. I've been trying to, how like New Jersey towns and Pennsylvania towns all have their own peculiar way of saying things. Mm-hmm. And I'm always wrong. And someone's going to be like, I'm from New Jersey. And you're saying that entirely wrong. I don't know how to say the name of this. I looked up her town. Prineville, if we're going with?
That's what we're going with. That's what someone on the internet said. So
yeah, but
we're going to go with that. Blame the internet if we're wrong.
Yeah, and then I've never known how to say this part of New Jersey either. Is it Bayonne or Bay? I don't know. Sorry, New Jersey friends.
Where's Sarada when we need her?
I know, yeah. She's our New Jersey person. I know Lodi.
All right, Glenda.
All right. So this article is from, let's just say New Jersey, Friday, May 21st, 1926.
You don't have the paper?
Yeah, I guess it's the Bayonne Evening News.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Former local girl victim of attack by masked fiend. So this is where she lived previously in New Jersey. Okay. And this is her old local paper. 13-year-old schoolgirl whose family moved from here 8 months ago, brutally attacked by man on way to her school, may have fractured skull. Armed farmers and troopers with bloodhounds searched the woods for the assailant. This comes from Trenton, which is, I guess, closer to Prineville.
Okay.
Scores of state troopers, aided by bloodhounds and armed posses of farmers, continued their search today of the dense woods surrounding Prineville for the brutal assailant of Rose Taradash, 13-year-old daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Taradash, who moved to Prineville 8 months ago from Bayonne. The girl is in critical condition at McKinley Hospital here. She was severely beaten and bruised and is feared that she may have sustained a possible skull fracture. Then there's a part of the newspaper that is completely trashed, and so I'm going to try to reconstitute what's going on here.
Sometimes you run into that with these newspaper archives.
So her parents were really upset because it was on a day when the school bus passed their house and didn't stop. So it was a day she was walking. And so they felt like if they had picked her up, like this wouldn't have happened, even though there's a suspicion, I think, that he's been seeing her walk and was just waiting for the opportunity. They claim that the bus never stops for the girl in fair weather, causing her to walk along a lonely road to reach the school. About 3 blocks from her home, Rose was accosted by a man. "Come here and read this paper for me," he said. And the girl, who later described the man as wearing a big white mask, a long black raincoat, and brown handkerchief over the lower part of his face, became frightened at the man's words and tried to run. But he caught her, struck her on the head with a club, and dragged her through a ditch to a field. There he beat her unconscious and trampled her with his heavy shoes. Some time later, the girl regained her senses and managed to crawl back to her home. There she collapsed in the arms of her grandfather, Joseph Zlotkin, of 85 West 20th Street, who was visiting her parents. He called her mother, who was in another room. Mrs. Teradash telephoned to the state police at Freehold, and Trooper Green went to the scene. He found the ground trampled down and traced footprints in the wet soil to a nearby woods where he picked up a whiskey bottle believed to have been discarded by the girl's assailant. Doctors T.E. Camper and W.L. Wilbur of Hightstown were called to the girl's home, and they ordered her sent to the hospital here for observation. When word of the attack reached County Detective Smith, he organized a posse and started a search through the thickly wooded region around Prineville. Farmers took down their shotguns and joined in the hunt. Trooper Green reported to Sergeant Teague that the brush and woods made it impossible to trace the girl's assailant. Thereupon, he obtained a brace of bloodhounds and set out for the place. He also ordered troopers from both barracks to join in the manhunt. Prineville is a small community, about 3 miles off Hightstown Freehold Road. The surrounding community is covered with dense woods. The Teradash family resided in Bayonne for many years, and they lived on West 20th Street, and later Mr. Teradash owned a grocery store opposite police headquarters for several years. From there he moved to 1047 Avenue C, where he conducted an ice cream parlor. It was from that address that the family moved to Prineville last fall. 2 brothers of the girl, Max and Irving, make their home in the city, the former living at 25 West 39th Street. Isn't it crazy how they give like everyone's personal address and everything?
Yeah, right.
At one point, they actually describe her and they talk about how well developed she is for a 12-year-old. Like that's important information.
Right. Yeah. Well, this was our past.
Yeah. So even though she's been struck on the head and once she goes to the hospital, she's there for a while recuperating. She tells about all these specific details of the man, about this kind of raincoat he's wearing and the mask. I was like, well, if it's really him, shouldn't they find the raincoat and the mask? They do.
Okay. Leaving no doubt.
Yeah, leaving no doubt. Yeah, I was like, oh, I had hoped that this guy had just got railroaded. But
yeah, you kind of want to root for the hermit, but
yeah, you want to root for the hermit.
In this case, no.
And also, like, I don't know how much he really is a hermit per se. They also refer to him as an eccentric farmhand and that he lives in a little hovel. I don't know if he's estranged from his family already, like that they know something is a little off from him.
As a hermit expert,
yeah,
and I believe I can call myself that.
Yeah, sure, why not? It's all about just saying you are.
A hovel is often a description for a hermit home, so we're going to go ahead and say he is a hermit.
He's officially a hermit.
Even if he works as a farmhand sometime, if he lives alone in a hovel, we're going to give him hermit status.
Yeah.
Also because this photo is going in my book.
And he has to be. So they have a picture of him in the newspaper, and they refer to him as a wild man. He has sort of, let's call it a Rasputin-esque kind of look to him.
My original idea for my hermits book was going to be about hermits and wild men, like human wild men, not Bigfoot, like circus wild men and other such things. And then there's too much hermits. I had to sort of reel it in a little bit, make it all about hermits.
Have you heard this description before of calling someone a bluebeard?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Is that also like sort of...
yeah, that's going to be code name for
someone who's perpetrated
assault,
a sexual assault of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they figure out pretty quickly that it must be this hermit whose name is Frank Lipshitz. This is an article from the Daily News in New York about a hint in the girl's attack. Murder clue seen in remnants in shack of suspect. Is Frank Lipshitz of Prineville a bachelor Bluebeard? Suspecting the cabin recluse accused of attacking a 13-year-old girl might be responsible for the disappearance and death of other girls or women, detectives yesterday tore up the floor of his lonely shack and searched the place thoroughly. The house is on the outskirts of Prineville. It was there that articles were found which led to the arrest of Lipshitz in connection with the attack of Rose Dash when she was on her way to school last Thursday. On a torn bit of rag was written, "The devil is making me do all the things I'm doing."
Ooh.
A pair of women's bloomers and a woman's vanity case were found, and the cabin officer said, "That's the man," Rose cried when she was taken to see him after his arrest. "Let me kill him," shrieked the mother. Lipshitz was charged with atrocious assault and battery. So there was this idea that he might, well, also that they might be able to pin a bunch of unsolved crimes on him. That didn't turn out to hold much merit. But when they went to his little hovel, they did find exactly everything that she said.
The mask, the raincoat, and the bandana.
Yeah. Wild attacker is held by police. So this is a very sensational first sentence, which doesn't turn out to be true on any level, by the newspaper. The battered bodies of several little girls lie buried beneath a lonely shack hidden in the woods 2 miles from Perrinville.
Ooh.
It isn't true, don't worry.
Not true.
This is the belief of police who were holding Frank Lipshitz, 27, for an attack on Rose Dash. In his secluded retreat, they have found articles of wearing apparel which apparently belonged to more than a half a dozen girls between the ages of 6 and 15. It is feared that the children who wore the clothes may have been the victims of the same mad desire which police say caused Lipshitz to attack Rose, and in more than one instance they believe they were victims who did not live to tell of their experience. As feeling in this section increases hourly against the accused man, police plan to take him to Trenton, where the Dash girl in McKinley Hospital will be asked to identify him. It was first planned to take both to the deserted section where the alleged attack was made, but this has been abandoned because of the girl's condition. As he stands before the hospital bed, Lipshitz will wear a brown mask. Her attacker's face, the little girl told police, was covered with a mask, and the one which the man will wear was found in his shack. No stranger individual than the alleged attacker has come to the attention of police in recent years. Lipshitz, while he is only 27, looks much older because of long, matted hair and a heavy black beard. He lives as a wild man. No life appears for a mile and a half around his hiding place, and the man fits into the wild background of his wooded retreat. Unkempt, ragged, living on what food he could steal, Lipshitz burrowed into his hole, darting forth only for food and to satisfy the desire which resulted in the brutal attack on the Dash girl. She was beaten over the head so that 12 stitches had to be taken in her scalp. There's no furniture in the hut, only a mattress on the bare floor, that and the little dresses.
Ugh.
One might pass 100 feet from the place and observe nothing. If the police opinion of other victims than Little Rose is correct, children who were not fortunate enough to escape, Lipshitz could have buried the bodies with little risk of detection. Fortunately, this does not end up being true.
Good.
So here's the article that actually goes with the photograph. They also talked about him as being sort of a religious zealot.
Yeah, they called him, in the caption on the photograph, I was going to ask you that, they call him a religious hermit.
You know, I think when we typically think of it's like someone who thinks they're Jesus or talks to Jesus, but I guess that this can run along all religious.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, from what they're talking about, I think it's more that he has delusions of talking to someone in sort of grandiose nature. This will ultimately lead to him not standing trial for this and being found insane.
Mm. So he thought the devil was speaking to him.
Yes.
Hey, it's strange familiars. Maybe he was.
Yeah, maybe he was.
Not to make light of the situation.
So this article is entitled, "That's Him. Girl Screams, Identifying Assailant." So this picture does not accompany this newspaper article, but I presume that somebody saw this or heard of it in order to write this article.
Mm-hmm.
So she screams, "That's him," but bearded fanatic is smilingly silent. Dramatic recognition of Frank Lipshitz by 13-year-old Rose Dash staged a scene of alleged crime, effected without anticipated violence, though heavily armed guard is posted, makes movie spectacle. In a situation tense with the dramatic, Rose Dash, 13-year-old Prineville schoolgirl, yesterday identified Frank Lipshitz, Polish farmhand and religious fanatic, as the masked man who strode from the woods and attacked her a week ago as she walked along a lonely road on her way to school. "That's him. That's the man," she screamed when detectives surrounded the bearded hermit and parted to give her a clear view. She leveled an arm and screamed again. "That's him. I know the hat and the shoes. He's the man that I used to pass every day for 2 weeks on my way to school." The identification took 15 minutes, when Lipshitz was hustled into a car with detectives and returned to his cell at the county jail at Freehold. He didn't once lose his stoic composure throughout the ordeal. He wore a suggestion of a smile as he left the jail and still was wearing it when he re-entered. It was not lost when Rose leveled an accusing finger at him, and he made no reply to the identification. Prosecutor Quinn and Chief County Detective Smith, leading the county's investigation, announced late in the day that they were very satisfied that Lipshitz is the man who struck Rose over the head with a club and criminally assaulted her. They found 3 marks in his shack on the Abraham Gurdon farm where he worked, one corresponding to the description given by Rose of the brown mask worn by her attacker. The Polish man did not wear a mask yesterday. A brown cloth cap was slopped over the side of his head, and he wore a black raincoat trailing down to his feet and heavy brown shoes, which Rose said she recognized. His khaki shirt had an extra high collar under which his flowing hair was tucked. Rose was brought from the McKinley Hospital, Trenton, where she was treated for injuries received during the attack by a state trooper who took her directly to her home. At Freehold, Prosecutor Quinn and Detective Smith, Davenport, Shields, and Sacco and Constable Philip Earhart of Asbury Park waited for the word that the stage for the dramatic meeting was prepared. Lipshitz, I'm sorry. This is like one of the only times you're allowed to swear on Stranger Values, but it's like accidental. So Lipshitz was then taken from his cell and escorted by Detective Smith to an automobile, passing down a double line of the curious. His hands were thrust deep in his pockets. He carried his head stiffly as though he had a sore neck, and Lipshitz rarely turned his head. He turns his whole body when he wants to look to either side, and the shirt collar came up to his ears. There was a short delay in front of the jail, and the detectives whisked him off to Prineville with 3 cars of news photographers and 2 cars of the curious trailing behind, and at no time was Lipshitz handcuffed. In the woods, a mile from the attack scene, the party waited for orders from Prosecutor Quinn to proceed, and during this time, the bearded Pole, who believes the Messiah is coming, told something of his life. He has an 8-acre farm near Prineville, he said, an account in a Hightstown bank, and a Ford automobile. He has taken out his first citizenship papers and intends to become a citizen. He has 2 brothers in New York City. Did he know Rose? He gave a characteristic shrug and laughed, but said nothing. Over 100 farmers, some of them in their Sunday meeting clothes, were at hand when Lipshitz was brought to the attack scene about 300 yards from the Teradash home. Rumors that an attempt to lynch the recluse might be made resulted in more than a dozen heavily armed state troopers from Trenton, Freehold, Lakewood, and Shrewsbury being at hand. The detectives, too, were heavily armed. But there was no attempt to reach Rose's attacker. On the contrary, the country folk seemed to enjoy immensely the spectacle of a dozen news photographers clicking incessantly and employing the mother, Mrs. Samuel Teradash, and her attacked daughter to assume character poses. Lipshitz, too, was asked to assume certain stances. He always hesitated at the request, and once someone directed his arm to the ground where Rose was felled with a club. Rose got her first glimpse of her attacker from 100 feet off. Lipshitz had been handed a club and stood stoically on the brink of the ditch looking off toward the Teradash home, his neck still rigid. Then the detectives parted around him and Rose, her head swathed in bandages.
Oh, those are bandages on her head. I thought she was wearing like a white hat. Those in the photo, those are bandages on her head.
Oh gosh, the poor girl. There's a really cool article in a Polish language newspaper from Buffalo, New York, which I will not in any attempt to pronounce.
Pronounce that, yeah.
But there's a picture of Rose and her parents and the attacker all lined up in a row. So maybe you can post that picture too, because they look very much of the time. You know, she's got a cool flapper haircut and what I thought was a cloche on her head, but is just bandages from her attack.
Mm-hmm.
Lipshitz gets indicted and he pleads not guilty.
Did they have insanity pleas back then, or?
Yeah, you'll find out that in a second.
Okay.
So this is from June 4th, 1926. Grand jury returns 2 bills in Rose Teradash attack case. Frank Lipshitz, 27, Prineville farmhand, who yesterday was indicted by the grand jury on charges of atrocious assault and battery and assault of a woman-child, was arraigned today before Common Pleas Judge Jacob Steinbach. Lipshitz told the court he had no lawyer and no money to employ one, but could take care of it himself. Judge Steinbach then assigned Max Feingold, local attorney, to represent the prisoner, and after a conference with Lipshitz, the lawyer entered a plea of not guilty. Judge Steinbach then set June 23rd as the date of the trial and placed him under a $7,000 bail. In default of bail, he returned to his cell to await trial. Lipshitz, in a dramatic meeting 2 weeks ago with his alleged victim at the scene of the attack, was identified by Rose Teradash, 13-year-old Prineville schoolgirl, as the man who, club in hand, strode from the bushes along the Prineville Road 3 weeks ago and clubbed her into unconsciousness. The Pole, a religious fanatic, denies all charges. The court today will assign Lipshitz a lawyer. He is not without funds, however, and detectives finding in his hovel home on the Gruden farm a bank book with $400 in deposits. He owns an 8-acre farm and a Ford automobile, which apparently this is, I guess, being used to show that maybe his little hermitage is not a necessity so much as part of his criminal behavior. So this goes to trial, and Dr. Henry Cotton of the State Hospital of Trenton made a report to the prosecutor and declared him insane. So in lieu of going through a trial and him getting some sort of punitive sentence, he is sentenced to the state mental hospital. And I did look, and he is listed in the census at the state hospital in the 1830s and 1840s. My suspicion is he probably dies
in 1930s.
1930s and 1940s. And so my suspicion is that he probably died sometime before the 1950 census. He's not buried in the little cemetery that is attached to the state hospital. And there is record of someone else with his name getting married later on, which I hope is not him being... It seems unlikely. Yeah. It's probably just someone else with the same name.
Yeah.
He probably either was released and died shortly thereafter or died in custody, and there's no records of what happened to him. But as I said before, Rose ends up getting married as a young woman, quite a young woman. She marries a man named Mr. Samuel Fox, and they have a series of, like a chain of men's clothing stores throughout New Jersey that lasts for, up until fairly recently, called Fox's.
I was going to say, that sounds familiar. I don't know if I've ever passed one or...
Yeah, perhaps like some of those old, like, we'll end up seeing boxes for those old department stores and old specialty stores. And yeah, she goes on to have children, and she dies in the 1970s, being the co-founder of these clothing shops.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Hopefully she had a nice and happy life after this encounter with this not nice fella.
Yeah, but the photo is just so incredibly striking, and the fact that they kind of made her reenact. First of all, they talk about her and very, even talking about her as a woman child is interesting in that, like, if they just refer to her as a child, it brings, which she was only 12 or 13. Right. That brings up one idea, but as a woman child, it almost lends an air of culpability or something to as if she's somehow.
I mean, you know, the way we treat kids and our ideas about, you know, when kids are reach the age of reason or when kids
have their own agency on any level.
Have always changed. You know what I mean? And it almost sort of lessens the blow, I guess, and that might be on purpose on the newspaper, not to lessen the blow to her, but to make it more palpable.
It's very salacious in a way when you talk about her being a girl child or like a woman child.
Yeah, to sort of make it more palpable to the reader, you know, to make it, you know, it's like when we talk about those wild man stories, often I wondered, especially when I was first writing it, like, are they throwing clothes on these wild men because it's like scandalous to have naked wild men running about the woods?
Yeah.
My opinion on that has changed over time. Now I think people saw Bigfoot wearing clothes back in the day. But in any case, you know, there could have been some of that going on, certainly. Not to in any way throw blame on her, but to lessen the impact for their readers. You know what I mean? Like describing her that way. But I don't know. All right, what's the second story, Alison?
Okay, the second story also involves horrible things that happen to little girls.
Okay. I forget. I know you told me we were going to do two stories, and I completely forget what the second one is.
Well, the second one has to do with a photo, too. So I happened to find a photo when we were vending somewhere.
Oh, that's right. Now I'm remembering. Yeah. This is interesting.
And I was like, I skipped back to the tent where we were vending.
You looked like the cat who ate the canary when you came back. Like, you just had this smile, and I was like, what did you get? And I thought it was something you collected. I thought you found something you collected.
Well, and I mean, I'd be happy keeping it, but I also thought like there are people that really actively collect hers. I knew that at that point that even if I didn't sell anything that day, I could at least sell the photo and I'd make money for it.
Right. So we mentioned her briefly, I think.
Yeah, her name is Olive Oatman. She kind of came back into the general public consciousness fairly recent, within the last 10 years, because there's a character based on her in the TV series Hell on Wheels.
Okay.
And so Olive Oatman's most characteristic feature is that she was tattooed on her chin with tribal tattoos after being captured by a Native American tribe in the Southwest. Mm-hmm. So that's the short part of her story. But the family story is really amazing. And then also the fact that at some point she's freed from her captivity and goes like on a lecture tour, has many photographs taken of her with these very distinctive blue tattoos on her chin. She's the first white woman to ever appear in a photograph wearing tribal tattoos like that.
Interesting.
So
she's often wearing like just regular Victorian gowns and stuff. And
yeah, she has a very serious look on her face, but not unlike anybody else getting their picture taken.
Yeah.
And I think if you looked at the photo really quickly, you might just think there was a smudge on it.
Right. Yeah. If you don't know, especially the CDVs, the smaller ones.
Yeah. So I found a CDV of her and I was like, oh my gosh, that's Olive Oatman. And I was like, is it? And then I was like, yeah, that's definitely her. So I did sell it, but we do have a picture of it so everyone can see a picture of her. But she's quite easily searchable.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And they have, because she kind of went on a lecture tour, and of course lots of people made money off of getting her story and her family story, which might not have actually gone to her. A lot of this is heavily documented. In fact, a lot of my research comes from a book that was written shortly after she was released from her captivity called Captivity of the Oatman Girls, being an interesting narrative of life among the Apache and Mojave Indians, containing also an interesting account of the massacre of the Oatman family in 1851 and the narrow escape of Lorenzo D. Oatman, the capture of Olive A. and Mary A. Oatman. So Olive was born in 1837 in La Harpe, Illinois, and that became an area that was sort of a hotbed for Mormonism. Mm-hmm. So while her parents were initially Methodist, they did become Mormon, I think probably owing a lot to proximity. They were probably being exposed to Mormonism in that area. And then shortly after, I don't want to go into the whole history of Mormonism. I don't really feel prepared to talk about that on any level.
That's a whole other show.
That's a whole other show. But after Joseph Smith's death, the family then became Brewsterites, which are an offshoot of Mormonism, because James Brewster, as a child, also saw the same angel. Is it Moroni?
Sounds right.
That Joseph Smith saw. And so he believed in a spiritual land in California called Bajan.
Okay.
And so in 1850, he left with about 100 other people for this spiritual land called Bajan. Because these tiny little insular religious movements tend to bring up a lot of, say, acrimony among people. Like that, a lot of times there's just like, if you've already split 5 different times from your religious, you probably have more of a, maybe your own, you want to forge your own way perhaps?
Yeah, maybe.
So a bunch of conflict arose, and Olive Oatman and her family decided to go a more southerly route to California through New Mexico and into Tucson. This is where the trouble arose, because they don't have the protection of other people.
Okay.
So while she has a large family, it's not like traveling with 100 other people where you're less likely to get into trouble.
Sure. Yeah.
This is also everyone's struggling. They don't have enough to eat. The people that live in this area don't have enough to eat. And they keep traveling and they reach a town near Phoenix, Arizona, and they're warned about potential violence. But they meet a man named Dr. LeCount, who has just made the journey all the way to California and comes back, and he says that this route is fine for them to go on themselves. What they would not have been privy to is what happened after Dr. LeCount sets off again ahead of them. And I'll read a little bit about that from the actual book, Captivity of the Oatman Girls.
Okay.
And this is being spoken of from the point of view of Olive's brother, who was attacked and left for dead and miraculously survived. It was well for us, perhaps, that there was not added to the burden of these long and weary hours a knowledge of the mishap that had befallen the messenger gone on before. About sunset of the day after Dr. Lecount left us, he camped about 30 miles ahead of us, turned his horses into a small valley, hemmed in by high mountains, and with his guide slept until about daybreak. Just as the day was breaking, and preparations were being made to gather up for a ride to the fort that day, 12 Indians suddenly emerged from behind a bluff hill nearby and entered the camp. Dr. Lecount, taken by surprise by the presence of unexpected visitants, seized his arms and with his guide kept a close eye upon their movements, which he soon discovered wore a very suspicious appearance. One of the Indians would draw the doctor into conversation, which they held in the Mexican tongue, during which others of the band would, with an air of carelessness, edge about, encircling the doctor and his guide, until in a few moments, despite their friendly professions, their treacherous intentions were plainly read. At the suggestion of his bold, intrepid, and experienced guide, they both sprang to one side, the guide presenting to the Indians his knife and the doctor his pistol. The Indians then put on the attitude of fight, but feared to strike. They still continued their efforts to beguile the doctor into carelessness by introducing questions and topics of conversation, but they could not manage to cover with his thin gaze the murder of their hearts. Soon the avenging ferocity of the Mexican began to burn. He violently sprang into the air, rushed towards them, brandishing his knife, and beckoned to the doctor to come on. He was about in the act of plunging his knife into the leader of the band, but was restrained by the coolness and prudence of Dr. Lecount. Manuel, the guide, was perfectly enraged at their insolence, and would again and again spring tiger-like towards them, crying at the top of his voice. The Indians soon made off, and going into the valley for their animals, they soon found that the 12 Indians had enacted the above scene in the camp merely as a ruse to engage their attention, while another party of the same rascal band were driving their mules and horse beyond their reach. They found evidences that this had been done within the last hour. The doctor returned to camp, packed his saddle and packages in a convenient secluded place nearby, and gave orders to his guide to proceed immediately to the fort, himself resolving to wait his return. Soon after Manuel had left, however, he bethought him of the Oatman family, of their imminent peril, and of the pledge he had put himself under to them to secure them the earliest possible assistance. And now he had become painfully apprised of reasons for the most prompt and punctual fulfillment of that pledge. He immediately prepared, and at a short distance towards us, posted upon a tree near the road, a card warning us of the nearness of the Apaches, and relating therein briefly what had befallen himself at their hands, reassuring us also of his determined diligence to secure us protection, and declaring his purpose, contrary to a resolution he had formed on dismissing his guide, to proceed immediately to the fort, there in person to plead our case and necessities. This card we missed, though it was afterwards found by those whom we had left at Pimlill village. What might have been, could our eyes have fallen upon that small piece of paper, though it is now useless to conjecture, cannot but recur to the mind. It might have preserved my fond parents, endeared brothers and sisters, to gladden and cheer a now embittered and bereft existence. But the card and the saddle and the packages of the doctor we saw not until weeks after, as the sequel will show, though we spent a night at the same camp where the scenes had been enacted. So, having not seen the card, the family proceeds, thinking things are okay because they've heard from Dr. Lecount that things are fine to proceed that way.
Things are great. Yeah.
Things are great.
Until they're not.
Until they're not.
They camp at the same spot.
Yeah, they go the same route. This is still from the position of Lorenzo, the son of the Oatman leader.
Olive's brother.
Olive's brother, yeah. Whether my father had read that notice left for our warning by Dr. Lecount and had from prudence concealed it, with the impression it may have made upon his own mind from us to prevent the torment of fear it would have enkindled, or whether a campfire might have been discerned by him in the distance at night before warning of the nearness of the Apache, or whether by spirit law or the appointment of Providence the gloom of his waiting doom had been sent on before to set his mind in readiness for the breaking storm, are questions that have been indulged and involuntarily urged by his fond bereaved children, but no answer to which has broken upon their ear from mountain, dale, or spirit land. For 1 hour the night before my father had wept bitterly, while in the wagon thinking himself concealed from his family, but of which I was ignorant until it was told to me by my eldest sister during the day. My mother was calm and cool and collected, patient to endure and diligent to do, that she might administer to the comfort of the rest of us. Of the real throbbings of the affectionate and indulgent heart of that beloved mother, her children must ever remain ignorant. But of her noble bearing under these trying circumstances, angels might speak, and her children who survive to cherish her name with an ardent, though sorrowing affection may be pardoned for not keeping silence. So they continue on, and this is a little bit about what's happening. He, and he's talking about his father, had always been led to believe that the Indians could be so treated as to avoid difficulty with them. He had been among them much in the western states, and so often tried his theory of leniency with success that he often censured the whites for their severity towards them, and was disposed to attribute injury received from them to the unwise and cruel treatment of them by the whites, which is sort of...
Yeah.
It's a,
vaguely progressive.
Yeah. It had long been his pride...
For the time.
It had long been his pride and boast that he could manage the Indians so that it would do to trust them. Often had he thrown himself wholly in their power while traveling and doing business in Iowa, and that too in times of excitement and hostility, relying upon his own coolness and self-possession and urbanity towards them to tame and disarm their ferocity. Less progressive.
Yeah.
As yet, his theory had worked no injury to himself, though often practiced against remonstrances of friends. But what might serve for the treatment of the Iowa Indians might need modification for the fierce Apache. Besides, his wonted coolness and fearlessness seemed, as the Indians approached, to have forsaken him, and I have never been able to account for the conduct of my father at this time, only by reducing to reality the seemings of the past few days or hours, to wit, that a dark doom had been written out or read to him before. After the Indians approached, he became collected, and kindly motioned to them to sit down, and spoke to them in Spanish, to which they replied. They immediately sat down upon the stones about us, and still conversing with my father in Spanish, made the most vehement professions of friendship. They asked for tobacco and a pipe, that they might smoke in token of their sincerity and of their friendly feelings towards us. This my father immediately prepared, took a whiff himself, and then passed it around, even to the last. But amid all of this, the appearance and conduct of father was strange. The discerning and interested eye of his agitated family could too plainly discover the uncontrollable, unspoken mental convulsions that would steal the march upon the forced appearances of composure that his better judgment, as well as yearnings for his family, dictated for the occasion. His movements were a reflecting glass in which we could as plainly read some dire catastrophe was breeding for us, as well as in the flashes and glances that flew from face to face of our savage-looking visitants. After smoking, these Indians asked for something to eat, and father told them of our destitute condition, and that he could not feed them without robbing his own family, that unless we could soon reach a place of new supplies, we must suffer, and to all this they seemed to yield only a reluctant hearing. They became earnest and rather imperative in every plea that we made to them of our distress, but increased their wild and furious clamors. Father reluctantly took some bread from the wagon, gave it to them, saying that it was a robbery, and perhaps starvation to his own family. And as soon as this was devoured, they asked for more. Meanwhile, surveying us narrowly and prying and looking into every part of the wagon, they were told that we could spare them no more. They immediately packed themselves into a secret council, a little to one side, which they conducted in the Apache language wholly unintelligible to us. We were totally into the dark as to their designs, save that their appearance and actions wore the threatening of some hellish deed. We were now about ready to start. Father had again returned to complete the reloading of the remainder of our articles. Mother was in the wagon arranging them. Olive, my older sister, was standing upon the opposite side of the wagon. Mary Ann, a little girl of 7, sat upon a stone holding to a rope attached to the horns of the foremost of the team. The rest of the children were on the opposite side of the wagon. My eyes were turned away. Suddenly, as a clap of thunder from a clear sky, a deafening yell broke upon us. The Indians jumped into the air, and uttering the most frightful shrieks, at the same time springing towards us, flourishing their war clubs, which had hitherto been concealed under their wolfskins. I was struck upon the top and back of my head, came to my knees, when, with another blow, I was struck blind and senseless. One of their number seized and jerked Olive one side, ere they had dealt the first blow. As soon, continues Olive, as they had taken me one side, and while one of the Indians was leading me off, I saw them strike my brother Lorenzo, and almost at the same instant my father. I was so bewildered and taken by surprise that the suddenness of their movements and their deafening yells that it was some little time before I could realize the horrors of my own situation. And when I turned around, opened my eyes, and collected my thoughts, I saw my father, struggling, bleeding, and moaning in the most pitiful manner. Lorenzo was lying with his face in the dust, the top of his head covered in blood, and his ears and mouth bleeding. I looked around and saw my poor mother, with her youngest child clasped in her arms, and both of them still, as if the work of death had already been completed. A little distance on the opposite side of the wagon, stood little Mary Ann with her face covered with her hands, sobbing, and a huge-looking Indian standing over her. The rest were motionless, save a younger brother and my father, all upon the ground dead. At this sight, a thrill of icy coldness passed over me, and I thought I had been struck. My thoughts began to reel and became irregular and confused. I fainted and sank to the earth, and for a while, I know not how long, I was insensible. So, of the whole family, the only 3 people that survive are Olive, her sister Mary, she talks about, and her brother Lorenzo, who was not expected to survive. It would be difficult for a teenaged Illinois girl in the 1830s to really know exactly where she was, who might have taken her, what particular people they were.
Yeah, what's in store for her?
What's in store for her. I don't think she knew really anything about what was going on that. And so she and her sister are originally within the family of a particular tribe, and then at one point sold to another tribe, and that's where she gets her tattoos. Shortly before she's found again, her sister dies because of a severe drought. She wasn't the only one to die, and she even said in some instances the elders in the tribe had given them food at the peril of some of their own people. She doesn't really go into extreme detail as to what happened to her. I mean, we can only imagine what happens when a bunch of men come and take child brides in the 1830s. But she and her brother are like, I'm always amazed at the resilience, especially of young people who can endure.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that they were able to have any sort of post-massacre life is remarkable to me.
Yeah, sure. Does she ever develop any kind of fondness for her captors in any sense?
She speaks of them in...
I mean, granted, that would be extremely... you couldn't fault her for not.
She speaks kindly of the chief of, especially the second tribe that she's living with, and his wife and the daughter who adopted them into her family. I don't know if that's sort of a matter of Victorian propriety of not going into the details of that. Or if there was, I mean, life is pretty nuanced, right?
Sure, right? Yeah. So does she essentially become someone's wife?
That's never specifically stated. Not in that capacity. She just lives with 2 different tribes.
And do those tattoos signify anything?
I think membership. You can imagine how well, like on a performance circuit, this backstory would be, because it sounds like something that they would just make up as a backstory for someone. This is reality.
Yeah.
So unlike other people who were tattooed by choice in the early 1860s, her photos are probably slightly predate, like Irene Woodward and Nora Hildebrandt. Yeah, so her brother Lorenzo, when he's able to be conscious again, manages to make his way to the original Mormon wagon train that they were on.
Wow.
I don't know how he did that, how he knew where he was, how he knew how to backtrack. With a head injury like that?
Yeah, right.
I mean, this is a time period pre-antibiotics. I mean, even just the idea of being without food and water and doing this a trek with a head injury, which...
Yeah.
So he tells everyone what happened and that Olive and Mary are still alive. And there's talk of white women living among Native Americans that starts to kind of become an urban legend. Apparently her sister was tattooed as well. They're 5 vertical lines with 2 triangles on either side of the outermost line of the chin. They were to symbolize that you would have a good afterlife.
Okay.
So in 1856, and this is, about a little more than 5 years after she's been taken captive, it reaches a community that's close to the Mojave village where Olive was living at the time. Lorenzo finds word of this and presumes that it's them, and they go on a search, and when the Mojave tribe agrees on a price for her return to her brother, and the U.S. government pays to have Olive set free and brought safely to Fort Yuma in Arizona.
So she was with them for 5 years?
Yes.
Wow.
It says that she'd forgotten her native English language after years with her captors, which I think is completely...
Yeah, maybe she had not spoken it that much, and it was a little difficult to step back into or something.
Yeah, probably not thinking you ever would, because she had no idea that her brother survived. The last she saw, he was clubbed over the head and dead like the rest of her family.
Yeah, yeah.
Her sister had just recently died in the drought, so
Yeah, I wonder
she really
what that
thought she
reunion
was
like.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So she and her brother go on this lecture tour. Like I said, there's a man who decides to take their story and run with it and write a little book about it. And I'm sure she sells her photos just like circus people did.
And hermits.
And hermits. But then they both decide that they kind of want a more quiet life, and he returns to be a farmer in Minnesota and gets married and has his own children. There's an area of Texas where they call Oatman, and it's named after the family.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, not Texas. It's in Arizona. So there's a town named after the family called Oatman. You know, sadly, they weren't all that far away from what is now California. I don't know if the promised land of Vahan was there.
Mm-hmm.
If they ever would have found it. But there is a town named for the family in the Arizona. It's west of Sedona on the way to Los Angeles, below Las Vegas, just for comparison.
It's called Oatmanburg.
No, it's just called Oatman.
Oliveville.
Oh, yeah, that would be better, wouldn't it, just to name it after her? So there's another sort of triumphant story of a girl who suffers incomprehensible tragedies and somehow able to make a life for herself. She does get married and adopts a child. We don't know if she ever had children while she was... She doesn't specifically mention that.
Oh, while she was...
While she was in captivity.
Yeah.
And she lives into the early 1900s.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Are there any pictures of her when she's older?
I think there are. I mean, the ones that you see the most are from her time right after her.
Yeah, when she's young and pretty.
Yeah. I don't know how tattoos at that time, how they wear.
Yeah, yeah.
But consequently, she becomes important to people who collect tattoo imagery, too.
Mm-hmm. So my only complaint about this is that olives and oats don't really go that well together.
They don't. Did you try it?
In preparation for this show, I ate a diet solely of olives and oats. Not a fan. I like them separately, just not together.
Yeah. I saw when I was maybe 5 years ago when I was at the National Portrait Gallery, they had a tiny little daguerreotype exhibit with, it might have been like notable women, and she was one of them, and there's this beautiful amber type of her where very prominently you can see that the tattoos.
Cool. That'd be neat to see.
Yeah, you can see them online.
Speaking of amber types, the curiosity of the week this week is an amber type.
Not of olive.
Not of olive, no. Just an amber type.
Like a creepy guy.
I know we've gone over it before.
Yeah.
But it's been a while. Explain what an amber type is.
It is a photograph on glass.
And they have to put something dark behind it, right?
To see the image correctly, yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes they're actually on something dark, like a dark piece of glass, or there's like a balsam applied to the back of it to make it black, or there's a piece of black fabric behind it. But this is a ruby amber type, so it is on a small pane of red glass with black behind it, which gives a real warmth to it. Mm-hmm. You can't always tell when you're looking at them.
So in general, like the first popular widespread photography technique would have been daguerreotype.
In certain parts of the world, yeah.
Amber type follows that, yes?
Yeah.
This was cheaper because daguerreotype's using silver?
Yeah, it just becomes more... more people are becoming photographers at this point, too. I think.
Is it an easier process than the daguerreotype, or is it pretty much the
both
same
pretty
thing?
difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I think daguerreotypes are, I would say, probably a little bit more difficult and more dangerous because of the mercury vapor and everything. So
I don't think any photography was
still is
danger free.
Yeah, it's still not danger free.
So this is a striking gentleman, amber type photograph in a half case, right?
It is, yes. He's missing the other side of his case, but if you would take that out of its case and hold it to the light, you will be able to see
the red tint.
Yeah, that it's a red tint.
Neat. I will take a photo of this photo and put that photo in the show notes.
How meta. Do people still say that?
And if you click on that, it'll take you to our Etsy shop where you can purchase that and other Curiosities of the Week. Those that are left also at our Etsy shop. My books are there. If you get them from Etsy, we'll sign them before they leave the house. Well, I'll sign them.
Yeah, I won't sign them.
I'll sign them before they leave the house. We have artwork, originals, and prints up there. We've got some of my music is up there. Strange Familiars t-shirts, patches, stickers, and mugs. We still have a few Strange Familiars mugs. Alison has other photographs and other ephemera up there in our Etsy shop. Our shop name is Lost Grave, but if you type in Strange Familiars, you should see our stuff come up. And I want to thank everybody who orders on Etsy. That's another way to help us out and get some cool stuff besides.
And I'm sorry I know I could have been better organized, but I'm really excited about the next story that I have, which involves the son of a local York preacher who becomes like a very morbid, decadent poet.
Well, yeah, I'm very excited to get to that, and that will be in the future.
This time I'll have like an outline. I'll have everything prepared. It'll be less of me going.
Sorry, I like a little bit of chaos.
Yeah, do you?
I like a little bit. At least I didn't interrupt you constantly. Like I did. I forget what it was the last time we did a story. I just interrupted you constantly to the point where it became ridiculous, and just went on rambles. I can't remember what we were talking about now, but I almost felt bad. But
well, I feel bad. This is how it works. I do research. And I just have like little scraps of paper on envelopes and like half remembered phrases and like, oh, I want to talk about this. And then Tim like makes an outline and gets all of my chaos into some sort of, we didn't do an outline this time. It's sort of like.
We're just kind of running with it.
Yeah.
We did raise some money for Kaya.life. I'm very happy about that with last week's show. That's what I wanted to do. I felt like they gave us their time and they gave us their stories, which you all will hear coming up, episode 500. And I was very, very happy to give back, but I'd like to continue with that. So I'm going to try to mention them every episode. It's Kaya.life, Kiya.life. And that's a nonprofit on Pine Ridge Reservation, and they're helping the community there. They're trying to build a playground. They're trying to do other great things to give the kids there something to do. And I think one way to keep kids out of trouble is to give them something to do. I think it's a great thing they're working on. They have other projects besides that as well. They're doing good work there. Kaya.life, Kiya.life. Thanks to everybody who helped them out. I'm very, very happy that Strange Familiars was able to bring them some donations. So thank you. That's it for this episode of Strange Familiars. We'll be back soon with more. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Howler Arts. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more or purchase music, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. We're on Instagram, at Strange Familiars, one word, no underscore. Please give us a like and a follow and all that good stuff there. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Strange Familiars. The Strange Familiars Gathering Group is also there on Facebook. And for Strange Familiars merch, it's strangefamiliars.com/merch. You'll see pictures of everything we have. Just click on that. It'll take you right to the Etsy shop where you can purchase any of those items. And 24/7, strangefamiliars.com.
Oh, the sun falls behind her hair and makes a halo of scarlet red, and still she weeps all alone. Angel breath caught in blood and bone, the long shadow twist and pull, the night birds wake to their call. towards the sky. Oh, little one, please do not cry. Someday you'll fly on white wing, free from the knot of fate's string, bright as a candle in the night. Oh, behold, blessed sight. Oh, tightest what they cannot steal. It is brightest which night reveals. For beneath blackened sky burn the palest truth.